There is a terrifying modern epidemic that is destroying your mind. It is not a virus, it is not a financial crisis, it is an absolute paralyzing fear of silence. Look at your life today. You cannot sit in a room for 10 minutes without reaching into your pocket. You cannot drive your car without a podcast filling the space. You cannot eat a meal without a video playing on a screen. You cannot even fall asleep without the television glowing in the background. You believe you're just staying informed. You believe you're just being entertained. But the brutal reality is that you're running away. You are sprinting away from your own thoughts. You are using constant, relentless noise as an emotional anesthetic to numb the quiet, terrifying reality of who you actually are. 2,000 years ago, the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius ruled the entire known world. He commanded legions of men. He was surrounded by wealth, politicians, and endless noise. Yet his ultimate power did not come from the crowded palaces of Rome. His power came from his profound, unbreakable ability to sit completely alone in a freezing canvas tent on the front lines of Germania in absolute silence. Today we will dismantle your fear of the void. We will explore the neuroscience of the distracted brain, the psychological difference between loneliness and solitude, and the ancient Stoic architecture of the emperor's tent. When you understand this Roman protocol, you will stop running from the silence. You will realize that solitude is not a punishment, it is the ultimate high-status superpower. But before we teach you how to build your inner citadel, I have a challenge for you. Subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments below, what is the one truth about your life that you are trying to ignore by constantly distracting yourself? Make your confession below. It is the first step to reclaiming your mind. I read every single one. Chapter 1. The story I'm about to tell you belongs to Julian. Julian was 26 years old and his mind was a chaotic storm. He was highly ambitious. He wanted to succeed. He wanted to build an empire. But he was deeply, quietly miserable. Julian could not stand to be alone. From the moment he woke up to the moment he collapsed into bed, his ears and his eyes were filled with artificial stimuli. If the internet went down or his phone battery died, a cold, creeping anxiety would grip his chest. He felt a deep, hollow emptiness inside his stomach. Whenever the silence crept in, his brain would instantly flood with doubts. He would think about his past mistakes. He would worry about his financial future. He would feel the crushing weight of his unfulfilled potential. So he drowned those thoughts out. He put on his headphones. He opened another tab. He scrolled endlessly through short videos that gave his brain tiny, cheap hits of dopamine. He kept the music loud at the gym. He kept the TV on in the background while he worked. He was terrified of the dark corners of his own mind. He thought that if he just kept moving, if he just kept consuming information, he would eventually find the answer to his anxiety. But the noise was not the cure. The noise was the disease. Julian was slowly losing his ability to focus, his ability to create, and his ability to know himself. He was a stranger living inside his own body. Chapter 2. What Julian was experiencing is a documented biological crisis. Modern neuroscience has revealed exactly why you are so terrified of being alone with your own mind. Researchers at the University of Virginia conducted a fascinating and horrifying psychological experiment. They placed hundreds of participants in a completely empty room. There were no phones, no books, no screens, nothing but a chair and bare walls. They asked the participants to sit completely alone with their own thoughts for just 15 minutes, but the researchers left one item in the room. They left a button that would deliver a painful electric shock to the participant if they pressed it. The results shocked the scientific community. 67% of the men in the study chose to push the button and voluntarily shock themselves with electricity rather than sit in silence for 15 minutes. Think about the profound tragedy of that statistic. Modern humans would literally rather experience physical pain than face the terrifying void of their own thoughts. When you remove external stimuli, your brain activates what neuroscientists call the default mode network. This is the network responsible for deep reflection, memory processing, and identity. It is where your brain actually solves complex problems, but because you have spent years drowning this network in cheap dopamine, it has become deeply dysregulated. When the silence hits, your default mode network panics. It floods your system with unresolved stress, suppressed trauma, and unexamined fears. Your amygdala fires a threat response. You feel physical anxiety. Your brain tells you that silence is danger. You are not addicted to your phone. You are addicted to the escape from your own unmanaged mind. Chapter 3. desperate to find peace. Julian returned to the stonemason's yard. He walked into the dusty courtyard and found Lucian, the elderly master, sitting on a wooden bench. The yard was completely silent. There was no hammering, there was no talking. Lucian was simply sitting perfectly still, watching the dust motes dance in a shaft of sunlight. Julian stood there for 5 minutes, shifting uncomfortably. The silence was making his skin crawl. His hand twitched toward his pocket to grab his phone. "How do you do this?" Julian finally blurted out, breaking the quiet. "How do you just sit here doing absolutely nothing? Does the boredom not drive you insane?" Lucian slowly turned his weathered face toward the young man. "I am not doing nothing." Lucian said quietly, "I am guarding the gates of my citadel. You call this boredom because your mind is weak. You need toys and noise to keep you entertained like a child." Julian felt a sting of defensive pride. "I'm just productive," he argued. "I like to keep my mind active. I like to be connected to what Lucian challenged, connected to the meaningless opinions of strangers, connected to the chaotic noise of the mob. You are disconnected from the only thing that actually matters." Lucian pointed a scarred finger at Julian's chest. "You are confusing loneliness with solitude." Lucian said loneliness is a state of poverty. It is the painful feeling that you lack something external. Solitude is a state of absolute wealth. It is the profound realization that you are completely whole without needing anything from the outside world. Lucian explained the Roman concept of the emperor's tent. Marcus Aurelius was the most powerful man on the planet. Lucian said he had access to every luxury, every pleasure, and every form of entertainment the ancient world could offer. He spent years commanding legions in the freezing mud of the barbarian frontiers. But at night, when the battles were over, he did not surround himself with noise. He retreated to his canvas tent. He lit a single candle, and he sat in absolute silence. He wrote his famous meditations, not for an audience, but for himself. He used the silence to confront his own ego, to process his fears, and to align his soul with his duty. His tent was his fortress. If the Emperor of Rome needed absolute silence to maintain his sanity, Lucian said, "Why do you think you can survive by filling every waking second of your life with digital garbage?" Chapter 4. "I cannot sit in the silence," Julian admitted quietly. "When it is quiet, my mind attacks me. I think of all my failures. I feel like I'm drowning." Lucian stood up and walked toward the dark interior of the stone workshop. "That is because your mind is filled with muddy water." Lucian said, "When you constantly shake a jar of muddy water, the mud is suspended. Everything is cloudy. You cannot see through it. The noise of your life is shaking the jar." Lucian led Julian into a small windowless stone room at the back of the shop. It was cold pitch, black, and completely silent. "Sit on the floor," Lucian commanded. "You will stay in this room for 30 minutes. You will not speak. You will not sleep. You will let the mud settle." Julian sat on the cold stone. Lucian closed the heavy wooden door. The darkness was absolute. The first 10 minutes were psychological agony. Julian's heart began to race. His brain, deprived of its usual dopamine hits, began to panic. The thoughts attacked him like a swarm of angry wasps. He remembered an embarrassing mistake he made at work. He worried about a bill he had to pay. He felt a sudden crushing wave of loneliness. His hands began to sweat. He wanted to scream. He wanted to bang on the door and demand to be let out. He was experiencing the electric shock of the Virginia study. His mind was begging for a distraction. Any distraction, but he could not escape, so he surrendered. He stopped fighting the thoughts. He let the anxiety wash over him. He sat with a terrifying, empty feeling in his chest. And then around the 20-minute mark, something miraculous happened. The storm began to break. The frantic screaming of his amygdala slowly ran out of energy. The anxiety, having been fully acknowledged, lost its power over him. Julian noticed the sound of his own breathing. He felt the solid, unyielding stone beneath his hands. The mud in the jar was finally settling to the bottom. The water of his mind was becoming clear. For the last 10 minutes, Julian did not feel lonely. He felt a deep, expansive sense of power. He realized that the thoughts he had been running from for years were just harmless ghosts. They could not hurt him unless he gave them permission. When Lucian finally opened the door, Julian did not rush out. He opened his eyes, slowly blinking against the light. He felt lighter than he had in years. Chapter 5. "You survived the void," Lucian said, looking down at the young man. "It was terrifying," Julian admitted. But then the terror just vanished. I realized there was nothing actually in the dark with me except myself. Lucian nodded. You have just experienced what the Roman Stoics called securitas, tranquility. It is the absolute unshakable confidence that comes from knowing you can handle your own mind. Lucian walked back to his workbench and picked up a heavy iron chisel. Most men spend their life building massive walls around their physical bodies. Lucian explained they seek wealth, they seek status, they seek loud crowds of friends to protect them from the world. But they leave the gates to their own minds completely unguarded. When you avoid solitude, you are abandoning your post, Lucian said. You are letting thieves and invaders sneak into your citadel. The anxieties, the fears, the toxic opinions of others, you let them all set up camp inside your head because you refuse to sit quietly and inspect the perimeter. Lucian told Julian that solitude is not a luxury, it is a daily required discipline. You must practice the daily vigil Lucian commanded every single day before you look at a screen, before you speak to another human being. You must sit in the emperor's tent. You must sit in silence and force the mud to settle. You must look your fears directly in the eye and watch them dissolve. When you master the silence, you become completely immune to the noise. Chapter 6. Julian took the lesson back into the modern world. He began a ruthless new protocol every morning. He woke up, and instead of reaching for his phone, he sat on the edge of his bed for 20 minutes in complete silence. He did not listen to music. He did not meditate with an app. He just sat at first. His brain still fought him. It craved the cheap stimulation, but Julian held the line. He watched his anxieties rise, and he let them fall. He processed the stress of his life, logically, objectively, like a Roman commander surveying a map. Weeks passed, and the transformation began to bleed into the rest of his life. He stopped putting headphones on when he walked to the train. He walked in silence, observing the world, feeling the ground beneath his feet. His posture changed. He walked taller, slower, with the heavy, dignified presence of a man who is entirely comfortable in his own skin. Then the real test arrived. A massive crisis hit Julian's engineering firm. A critical server failed, corrupting months of client data. The office descended into absolute chaos. Managers were screaming. Colleagues were panicking and pointing fingers. The noise of the panic was deafening. The old Julian would have absorbed the panic. His heart would have raced. He would have sought a distraction or shut down completely. But the new Julian was anchored to the stone. While the rest of the team ran around the boardroom in a frenzy, Julian simply closed his eyes for 10 seconds. He retreated to the emperor's tent. He found the absolute unbreakable silence he had cultivated in the dark room. He let the mud of the panic settle. When he opened his eyes, his mind was terrifyingly clear. He did not raise his voice. He did not argue. He simply walked to the main terminal, blocked out the screaming of his co-workers, and began to type. Because his brain was no longer cluttered with emotional noise, his default mode network solved the problem with flawless precision. Within 40 minutes, he had isolated the corruption and bypassed the failing server. The crisis was averted. The boardroom went dead silent. The senior directors stared at Julian in shock. "How did you stay so calm?" the lead director asked. Julian looked at him, his eyes completely steady. "Because I was not in the storm," Julian answered quietly. "I was in the tent." Chapter 7. When you conquer your fear of silence, you conquer the world. Julian had realized that loneliness is just a symptom of an unexamined life. When you hate being alone, it is because you are in bad company. You do not like the person you are trapped in the room with. But when you commit to the brutal, boring, uncomfortable practice of solitude, you force yourself to clean the room. You process the garbage, you sweep the floors, you confront the ghosts, and once the room is clean, solitude becomes your greatest sanctuary. You stop needing the validation of the crowd. You stop needing constant entertainment to feel alive. You realize that your own mind is a vast, wealthy empire, and you are the sovereign ruler of it. You become dangerous to the modern system. Society relies on your fear of silence. It relies on your desperate need for distraction so it can sell you cheap dopamine products, rage, and mindless entertainment. But the man or woman who is perfectly content sitting in a quiet room cannot be manipulated. They cannot be bought. They cannot be controlled. Look at your own habits today. Are you terrified of the quiet? What thoughts are you trying to drown out with that podcast? What fears are you trying to outrun by scrolling on that screen? The noise will not save you. It is only making you weaker. It is time to enter the stone room. It is time to let the mud settle. It is time to build the emperor's tent in the center of your mind. Drop the screen, face the void, find your presence. I will see you in the next video.